St. Jude Hospital, nestled in the heart of a sleepy city, was a building that seemed to stand the test of time, resisting the changes transforming the landscape around it. With its Gothic architecture, tall windows, and elongated shadows, the hospital was an imposing but also macabre place. The atmosphere surrounding the building was enough to send chills down anyone's spine, conjuring up visions of horror stories that lived up to its sinister appearance. Claire Walker, an ambitious young nurse, had recently joined the staff at St. Jude Hospital. Determined to prove herself and escape the weight of the scary stories circulating about the hospital, Claire accepted a night shift at the facility. She was determined to focus on her work and ignore the superstitions that swirled around the place. However, as the sun set and the night enveloped the hospital in darkness, Claire couldn't help but feel an unsettling presence. During her routine rounds, she began to notice mysterious and unexpected sounds. The silent corridors were interrupted by muffled whispers, like the cries of lost souls echoing off the cold walls. "You shouldn't be here," murmured a voice, but Claire couldn't identify where it was coming from. Her heart raced, and she tried to shake off the feeling of discomfort that consumed her. It was just her imagination, she told herself. The darkness of the night could play with anyone's mind. On her way, Claire noticed a room, number 307, which left her with an uncomfortable feeling. She approached the door and hesitated for a moment before turning the handle. The room was dark. Only a dim light illuminated the room. The nurse entered cautiously, feeling the weight of the silence that seemed to envelop the place. The whispers, the same ones I had heard in the corridors, seemed clearer here. They called her, whispering her name in a voice that seemed to echo from centuries of solitude. "Claire, Claire." The nurse felt a shiver run down her spine as she looked around, unable to locate the source of the whispers. The room itself was deserted except for a figure lying on the bed. Only the figure's eyes were visible, fixed on Claire with an intensity that left her speechless. She noticed that the patient's face was wrapped in white bandages, leaving only his eyes exposed. They were eyes that seemed to beg for help, full of anguish and despair. The voice whispered again, asking for help, begging for relief. Claire was paralyzed with fear, her mind spinning for rational explanations. She picked up the patient's chart that was hanging at the end of the bed, but the information there was vague, revealing only the name, Samuel Hawthorne. The room was empty, and notes in the medical record suggested that the patient had died many years ago. Claire turned to check the room once more, but Samuel Hawthorne was gone. A feeling of emptiness and silence took over the environment, and the whispers stopped, as if they had never existed. The nurse was alone, immersed in darkness. She walked away from the room, terrified and confused, questioning her own sanity. Claire knew something was deeply wrong at St. Jude Hospital. Stories about the place's past and the supernatural experiences she had begun to experience tormented her. The hospital seemed to hold unfathomable secrets, and Claire was determined to uncover them no matter what the cost. After the terrifying experience the night before, Claire Walker couldn't get patient Samuel Hawthorne out of her mind. She was determined to discover the truth behind the mysterious figure and whispering voices that had haunted her at St. Jude Hospital. However, their initial investigations did not bring concrete answers. The stories circulating about the hospital were dark. Some claimed the building had an unholy past, while others cited rumors of paranormal phenomena. Claire was determined to separate fact from fiction and find out what was really going on at the hospital. As she deepened her investigation, Claire discovered that the building that now housed St. Jude Hospital had served many purposes over the years. In the 19th century, the place was an orphanage run by an austere nun called Mother Abigail. The nun was known for her relentless discipline and harsh parenting practices for the children in her care. Historical records have revealed horrifying stories of abuse and neglect of children at the orphanage. Some reports mention children disappearing under mysterious circumstances, while Mother Abigail justified these tragedies as a result of the sins committed by the children. The stories were disturbing, and Claire began to suspect that the orphanage's unholy past was somehow linked to the supernatural experiences at St. Jude Hospital. Determined to uncover the truth, Claire ventured into the hospital's dark hallways. During one of her nocturnal forays, she found an old rusty door hidden in a corner. The door led to a basement that had been sealed for years. Claire decided it was time to explore the space and find out if there was any connection between the orphanage's past and the supernatural events at the hospital. With a concentrated effort, Claire managed to force the door open. She entered the basement, which was dark and dusty, lighting the way with the dim light of her flashlight. As he explored the space, he noticed an old trunk covered in cobwebs and a pile of dusty documents. Claire realized she had found a treasure trove of information about the orphanage's dark past. The trunk contained diaries and records written by Mother Abigail. The documents detailed the cruel rituals and practices that the nun imposed on the children at the orphanage. Mother Abigail believed that these rituals would purify the children's souls and protect them against the dark forces that haunted the orphanage. The records also mentioned the nun's belief that the souls of impure children were used to feed a dark entity that she believed was a guardian of forbidden knowledge. Claire was horrified to read descriptions of the rituals and cruelty of Mother Abigail, who had deeply held convictions that she was doing God's work. As Claire continued to dig through the documents, she found a reference to an ancient book that Mother Abigail used in her rituals. It was known as the Book of Penance and contained words and symbols that Claire could not understand. However, she knew that the book was the key to understanding what was happening in the hospital. Armed with this information, Claire was determined to find the Book of Penance and, perhaps, discover how to sever the link between the orphanage's unholy past and the supernatural forces that tormented St. Jude Hospital. She knew the answer to the mysteries that haunted her was closer than ever. The discovery of Mother Abigail's diaries and records in the basement of St. Jude Hospital had shed light on the orphanage's unholy past and revealed the cruel practices and dark rituals the nun performed in search of purification. Claire Walker was now more convinced than ever that the past was directly related to the supernatural forces tormenting the hospital. As the mystery grew, supernatural events at the hospital began to intensify. The nighttime whispers that Claire had heard earlier became louder and more aggressive. Patients who had previously remained silent began reporting terrifying visions. Some claimed to have seen shadows writhing on the walls, while others described encounters with macabre entities. Claire found herself trapped in an escalating nightmare. She could barely sleep at night, tormented by terrible nightmares that left her exhausted and distressed. The feeling of being watched became constant, as if invisible eyes followed her wherever she went. The stress was starting to get to her, but the nurse refused to give up her search for answers. One night, while going through old files in the basement for additional clues, Claire was suddenly thrown against the wall by an invisible force. Books and documents flew through the air, and Mother Abigail's voice echoed in the darkness, cursing Claire for disturbing the hospital's hidden secrets. Claire fell to the ground, her body aching and her heart racing. She scrambled to her feet and grabbed an old book that had been thrown towards her. It was the Book of Penance, the same one mentioned in Mother Abigail's records. Claire realized that this book contained the answer she was looking for and the key to confronting the supernatural forces that haunted the hospital. Determined to confront the evil that lurked in the depths of the building, Claire began to study the book with intensity. She spent hours on end deciphering the words and symbols that filled its ancient pages. Although the content was dark and disturbing, Claire knew that the only way to save the hospital and its patients was to understand what was happening. As her book interpretation skills improved, Claire began to discover the nature of the entities that haunted the hospital. They were known as the Shadows of Penance, and were dark entities that Mother Abigail believed were the guardians of the forbidden knowledge she sought. Claire also found an exorcism ritual in the pages of the book, a ritual that could supposedly banish the shadows of penance. She knew that the time to confront the dark entities was approaching. With the Book of Penance in hand and her knowledge growing, Claire was determined to face supernatural forces and free St. Jude Hospital from the darkness that consumed it. As she prepared for the impending battle, Claire couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched by an unseen presence, the very shadow that had followed her from the beginning. However, her determination and courage were stronger than ever, and she was ready for the final fight against the Shadows of Penance and the darkness that had haunted St. Jude Hospital for so long. Claire knew the battle would be the hardest of her life, but she had no choice but to face the evil that threatened to consume the hospital and everyone inside. With the Book of Penance in hand and a deeper understanding of the Shadows of Penance, Claire Walker was determined to confront the supernatural forces that had plagued St. Jude Hospital for so long. She knew the fight would be the hardest of her life, but she had no choice but to confront the evil that threatened to consume the hospital and everyone inside. The atmosphere inside the hospital had become even more oppressive as Claire prepared for the confrontation. The nighttime whispers intensified, and the terrifying visions that haunted the patients became more frequent. Some patients reported seeing dark shadows that writhed and reached out like tentacles, trying to reach them. Others described pale faces and empty eyes watching them from the dark. Claire knew she couldn't wait any longer. She prepared to perform the exorcism ritual described in the Book of Penance. The procedure was complex and required a deep understanding of the words and symbols contained in the book. The nurse tirelessly studied the old pages, memorizing each step of the ritual. The night of the final confrontation has finally arrived. Claire chose the basement as the location for the confrontation, where she had first found the Book of Penance. With a flashlight, the book, and an antique crucifix in her hands, she entered the dark basement, knowing she was not alone. She could feel the presence of the penance shadows around her, watching her. The basement was plunged into darkness, but Claire refused to be intimidated. She recited the words of the ritual with conviction as the shadows twisted and stirred around her. The words echoed off the dusty walls, and the air was charged with static electricity. As the ritual progressed, Claire felt the pressure of the darkness increase, as if the shadows of penance were fighting her attempt to banish them. She maintained her concentration, reciting the words with determination while the shadows writhed and made ominous murmurs. Suddenly, a dark figure materialized in front of Claire. It was an elongated shadow with bright red eyes, full of malice. The shadow hurled itself at her, trying to envelop her in darkness. Claire felt an invisible force trying to drag her into the dark depths. With the crucifix in hand, Claire faced the shadow, resisting its advance. She recited the final words of the ritual, channeling the power of the Book of Penance and her own determination. An explosion of light and black shadows filled the basement. The penance shadows were struck by the light and began to dissolve into black smoke. Claire could hear high-pitched, agonizing screams echoing in the air as the dark entities fell apart. She knew the battle was being won, and the hospital was being freed from the grip of the darkness that consumed it. When the last shadow disappeared, the basement fell silent, and the air felt lighter. Claire had triumphed against the forces of evil that had haunted St. Jude Hospital for so long. The exorcism ritual had worked, and the shadows of penance had been banished. Claire was exhausted but relieved. She had faced supernatural horror and emerged victorious. The hospital was finally free of the curse that had afflicted it for years, and the terrified patients experienced a relief they had not known since before their admissions. The story of St. Jude Hospital, full of mystery, terror, and the supernatural, has become a legend in the small town. Claire Walker, now considered a local hero, continued to work at the hospital, but she knew the supernatural horror she had faced would never be forgotten. The hospital would remain a grim reminder that the past can haunt the present, but Claire also knew that light and courage could triumph over the darkest shadow.